We're doing a new series called Best Ball in 15, where we replay a best ball draft in about 10 minutes and then do a lineup review at the end. So let's jump right in. You're watching The Climb. All right, so let's jump right into this draft here. I ended up in the 4 spot in this one. I should probably start taking more Christian McCaffrey. He goes ahead of me here, but the pocket of running backs at the 2-3 turns still feels really nice. So I've been taking a lot of those guys. In terms of Tyreek Hill versus Cooper Kupp, it's kind of a toss-up on those two for me. So I ended up going Tyreek this time. Had quite the wide receiver run to start this draft. Bijan falls all the way to round 10, pick 10, which feels pretty rare. But yeah, at this point in this draft, I was definitely looking to go RB here at the 2-3 wraparound. So with my first pick, I went Pollard. He's a guy that I'm very overweight on at this point. EJ and I will be doing an exposure episode sometime next week. And then came back around Breece and Ramondre. I've generally been taking more Ramondre, so I went with Breece in this draft. Also considered Lamar there, but I think Breece and Ramondre are guys that I'm still taking ahead of Lamar. But once they come off the board, things really seem to flatten out, and at that point, I start looking to add a Lamar, a Justin Fields, a Mark Andrews. And while I almost never have 0 receivers through 4 rounds, Chris Allen here at the 10 spot, Bijan Saquon, and then he gets Mark Andrews, Lamar in the 3-4. I've almost never seen Lamar and Mark Andrews go at the 3-4 like that. So a really unique start there, it feels like. For my 4th round pick, I went Drake London. I'm overweight on. I was hoping that Terry McLaurin would get back to me in the 5th. However, that ultimately did not happen. So by the time I was back up in the 5th round, it was a pretty gross tier. I don't like the receivers at that point. And, Ken Walker's fine, but I already have 2 running backs. So I pivoted and went with the elite tight end route here with George Kittle. So now at this point, with only 2 wide receivers through 5 rounds, I was definitely looking to add wide receivers with my next 2 picks in this draft. And it's a pretty good pocket to do so right here. So lots of different options for me in the 6th and 7th. And then again, looking over at Chris Allen's lineup from the 10 spot, that's the one that once I saw him get that Lamar, Mark Andrews start, that was the lineup I was keeping an eye on, and to see if they were able to recover at receiver or not. So I ended up taking Jordan Addison here. I'm pretty out on Mike Evans and the Tampa offense at this point. So Addison feels like a much nicer option here. For my next pick, I was deciding between Deontay Johnson or Jahan Dotson. Dotson provided some week 16 and 17 correlation, but ultimately I'm a big believer in Deontay Johnson for this year. I know Hayden just published some work showing that he's due for regression, not only in the touchdown department, but in the success of deep target department. So Deontay Johnson is a player that I've been taking a lot of, and I probably won't stop unless his price adjusts pretty considerably. So by now, the plan was for me to take Tua in the 8th and then come back around and hopefully get a Baltimore receiver in the 9th for that game stack. Unfortunately, Zay Flowers is already off the board, so I'm essentially banking on Rashad Bateman getting back to me. However, Dotson fell almost around past ADP, so I took him here and tried to push Tua to see if I could get Tua in the 9th. That value on Dotson plus the fact that he was correlated with some of my other pieces felt too good to pass up here. And I did end up getting Tua to fall. So now at this point in the draft, I was sitting at a lineup with Tua, Tony Pollard, Breece Hall, Tyreek, Drake London, Jordan Addison, Deontay Johnson, Jahan Dotson, George Kittle. So unfortunately, the Baltimore pieces are pretty dried up at this point, so I'm going to have to rely on late options, either Gus Edwards or Isaiah Likely, to complete that game stack with Miami. But overall, from a structure, at this point, I'm feeling pretty good across the board in all my positions. So for this next pick, I had a lot of different avenues I could go. Had kind of decided on going Rashad Penny here. Just he's another player who I've been taking a lot of. He goes off one pick before me, and so I debated between Boyd and Lazard. Ended up going with Lazard. He's not necessarily I take a lot of, but he gives me another bet on the Jets when I already have Breece Hall. And then you can see I was hoping to go running back, either Eli Mitchell or Antonio Gibson, again for some correlation there. And both players in contingent upside situations that I like, but they both went off the board before my 11th round pick. So I settled for Damian Harris past ADP instead. At this point in the draft, I kind of am starting to think through what I want to do with my second quarterback position. The most obvious one that jumps out at this point is Kenny Pickett with Deontay Johnson. Unfortunately, there's virtually no good Seattle stack options at this point. I could maybe do Noah Fant late, but that's not particularly appealing, and I'd rather go Isaiah Likely for the Miami bring back. So at this point, I was really starting to have a hard time thinking through what I wanted to do with that second quarterback. I considered going Jordan Love and then tacking on Dobbs, but unfortunately Jordan Love came off the board before my next pick. And so receiver and running back both get kind of gross in this range. So reached a little bit on Donovan Peoples-Jones to make him a game stack with my Jets guys. In general, I've been taking more Cedric Tillman as an 18th round flyer than I have Donovan Peoples-Jones in this range, but it worked at this point. So my lineup now is Tua, Tony Pollard, Breece Hall, Damian Harris, Tyreek, Drake London, Addison, Deontay Johnson, Jahan Dotson, Allen Lazard, Romeo Doubs, Donovan Peoples-Jones, and George Kittle. And so I was hoping that Raheem Mostert would fall. It would have been a pretty steep fall to get him in the late 14th, but he would have been another way to add to my Miami bet and get some ADP value for this lineup. And he did fall pretty deep into the 14th, but ultimately didn't quite get back to me. So at this point, with my next two picks, I had ultimately settled on taking Jeff Wilson and Kenny Pickett. Looking at the teams around the turn here, pretty much nobody needed a quarterback, so I felt good that Kenny Pickett would be there for me in the 15th. And so that's ultimately the route I went down here. So structurally at this point, I had 4 running backs, 8 wide receivers, 2 quarterbacks, and then George Kittle. So probably I was definitely done at quarterback at this point, and then was planning to add another running back, another wide receiver, and another tight end to close out this draft. So at this point in my head, now that I had the Pittsburgh stack, I was starting to think through the Seattle bring back a little bit more seriously. And really the only 2 options would be Noah Fant or Kenny McIntosh, the 7th round rookie that Seattle drafted. Neither of those were particularly appealing. And so for this pick, I was going to take Chuba, but I got Michael Mayer to fall almost around past ADP, and he's a guy who I already think is way too discounted. There just hasn't been any buzz on him yet, and as soon as we get some, he's going to end up shooting back up, into the Sam Laporta range, the Tyler Higbee range. So I ended up pivoting from my plan here a little bit and taking Michael Mayer, and then getting Gus Edwards for the Baltimore bring back. So some other names that I was debating between here heading into my final pick: Jerome Ford, another guy to round out my running back room if I just wanted to punt on any additional correlated pieces. Obviously still have Isaiah Likely, although with the elite tight end, I almost never do 3 tight ends. I think that's a suboptimal build. So it's really between Jerome Ford, Isaiah Likely, and Kenny McIntosh for this last pick. And I really went back and forth up until the last second when I was on the clock here, particularly between Ford and Likely, and ended up going Isaiah Likely here. I just had more of a bet on that Miami team, so getting 2 pieces from Baltimore felt like the way to go here. So we'll flip over to some slides here for a quick lineup review. All right, got the lineup up on screen here. Ended up with a 2-5-8-3 build. I've also got the real-time ADP value of each pick up there as well. So I kind of walk through each of the things that I think through when I'm evaluating a lineup after the fact. So first and foremost, are our QBs stacked? Yep, we got Tua and Tyreek and Kenny Pickett and Deontay Johnson. Then are they game stacked? Mike Leone's Best Ball Manifesto showed that the expected value of your lineup starts dropping pretty quickly when you don't have those quarterbacks game stacked. So we do have the Tua Baltimore stack. Even if it's a little weak, we did add on 2 late pieces from Baltimore, but we did not get the Seattle bring back for Pittsburgh. So that's a strike against this lineup. Next, in terms of the roster construction, overall it's fine, but it's not my favorite. Again, going 3 tight ends when I have the elite tight end isn't usually the route I want to go. And when micro edges can make a difference in these big tournaments, that is something that could cost me. So dinged myself a little bit there, but overall I like the complexion of my other parts of this lineup, the running backs, the wide receivers, the quarterbacks. So next, ADP value. I gave this one a 4 out of 5 for ADP value. There wasn't any crazy values in this, but pushing Jahan Dotson almost a full round past ADP, and in turn pushing Tua a half round past ADP, and adding in the correlated piece with Dotson in the process, that felt like a really good pocket there of the draft for me to not be overreaching. And also the Michael Mayer thing, I talked about it during the draft, but I think he's already mispriced and going too low. So then to get him almost a full round past that felt like really, really good value there. And then finally, looking at the playoff stack, that just wins week 15, that could certainly help us get through that round. A little bit weaker in week 16, but do have a couple skinny stacks there. And then finally, pretty correlated for week 17. Just wish I could have gotten the a Seattle piece for my Pittsburgh guys there. So finally, if you haven't heard, we are on the road to 100 subscribers here, and we're going to give away $25 when we get there. So all you have to do to be entered is follow us on Twitter or subscribe on YouTube. Hopefully you enjoyed this shorter draft format. Let us know by leaving a like on the video, or if you disagree with my rating of my own team here. I'm trying to be a tough grader, but maybe I'm not being hard enough. Let me know in the comments if you don't agree with my own self-review here. So I am Alex, and this has been another episode of The Climb.